FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
This episode of the Financial Survival Network is brought to you in part by Sandstorm Gold Royalties. Sandstorm Gold Royalties is a different kind of gold company. They purchase royalties on select mining operations and receive a percentage of the revenue in return. Sandstorm now has a portfolio of over 185 gold royalties around the world. See how gold royalties differ from other gold mining investments at sandstormgold.com. That's sandstormgold.com. Sandstorm Gold Royalties trades on the TSX as SSL and on the New York Stock Exchange American as SAND.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 11/20/18. Well, hey, we saw during the recent midterm election prolific voter fraud all over the place, certainly in my adopted home state of Florida, Broward County. The woman, Brenda Snipes, who is in charge of counting the votes, numerous proven allegations against her of tampering, of tossing ballots that she was supposed to keeping ballots she was supposed to toss, and basically an all-around bad person. And an incompetent bad person. It's one thing when you have corruption. It's another thing when you have incompetence. When you have incompetent corruption, forget it. All bets are off. Well, our good friend Wayne Jett is with us now. And Wayne, you've been on the show before. Your website is classicalcapital.com. And we're thrilled to have you back on with us.
Glad to be here, Kerry, and thanks for asking. It's certainly a very interesting time.
Oh, yeah. So voter fraud, certainly a good chance of it in Arizona. In California, in Orange County, the Democrats swept every congressional seat in Orange County. Interesting thing was that the people in Orange County for Senate, they were way ahead. And then for congressional seats, they didn't vote for the same party. I mean, a little bit strange here, isn't it?
It certainly is. And the same would be said in spades in Maricopa County in Arizona for the Senate race versus the governor's race. I think my count was 357,000 people in Maricopa County, which is basically Phoenix, which is the large portion of the population of the state. 357,000 voters split their ballot between a Republican governor and the so-called Democrat senator candidate.
Unheard of. That's unheard of. Isn't it? Isn't that unheard of?
It's outrageous. And I'm still optimistic that there is going to be prosecution. I believe that there was sufficient advance intelligence observation of these things that the federal government law enforcement officials were sufficiently aware and alert, and certainly had plenty of previous experience in previous elections. This by no means was the first, as I'm sure you agree. Mm-hmm. But it was certainly in your face this time. In certain respects, in certain states, and others, it's been pretty much, I think, under the radar so far. But let's see what the administration does about it. I think that there's some dust still settling in terms of getting everything in order, but I'm still looking for prosecutions. I'm talking about criminal prosecutions for vote fraud, not just of little guy voters, but of officials in charge of these elections. And I'll be disappointed if we don't see it. Of course, lots of people are disappointed and they express it already. But I've been optimistic, and I still am at this point, that we have a real different circumstance, a markedly different circumstance than we had through 2016 as far as the government is concerned. And I'm very hopeful that we're going to see high-level officials prosecuted. said so before, and I haven't by any means abandoned that hope and expectation.
So you think they might just go after them, to just look at so many places. Were you surprised that they failed on their nefarious plan in Florida, both trying to steal the governorship and the Senate seat, as well as in Georgia, where they tried to steal the governor's seat there as well?
Well, I'm certainly pleased that they seem to fail in both of those places, but not particularly surprised. I've been, as I say, expecting good results, and in general terms, I think we got them. I do believe that we lost a lot of Republican good new candidates from the basically Trump supporter type of candidates. Both from California, but certainly from other places around the country. Lots and lots of money was certainly pumped into certain elections around the country trying to get the Senate, but they were not successful. I think, as the president very explicitly laid out, the circumstance in the Senate was one during his first 2 years, in which, though we had supposedly a majority of Republican numbers by one vote, in fact, we had a minority of only 48 votes in terms of dependable votes. The two Arizona senators, one of whom is deceased, one of whom resigned, announced his resignation early. Actually, he didn't withdraw from the Senate, but that he simply was not running again. The Flake senator was in the circumstance that it really put the Trump leadership in a position of having about 48 responsible votes or dependable votes, and in some circumstances, some of those votes had the possibility of going away. But the Kavanaugh thing showed that very clearly, just how closely contested the majority votes were, and that he was able to prevail upon. So let's see what we have now. The 53 votes, it looks like, 53-47, ought to be a stronger position substantially than what we had before. And though we won't have, at least initially, we won't have cooperation with the House, most likely, there are a great many things that need to be done. Primarily, affirming the new federal judge appointees from the Trump administration. Right. That Senator Flake has continued now this month to block their confirmation or refuse to vote for their confirmation. The reason those judges are so important is because we need more judges looking for justice as opposed to being controlled tools of the establishment, as has been the case appointed certainly by Obama and by Bush as well. So that needs to be accomplished before the sealed indictments are sprung upon the court system across the country. Right. So looking at it, what about Montana? Tester won by a few thousand votes. Think there was fraud there? I wouldn't be surprised at fraud in any location, particularly with the ability to manipulate machine vote counting. That is, but at the same time, I believe that kind of fraud is detectable. And I believe the surveillance techniques are sufficient to detect that and to prosecute it. It's a matter of when the timing is going to be right to do that. I know all of us are, at least those of like mind, are very eager to see action on this. But I'm convinced that the timing of the plan needs to be carefully considered, because if you get ahead of yourself, things blow up in your face as far as the accomplishment of the objectives long term of taking out of office the tools of the ruling cabal that has harassed and victimized the world for hundreds of years. Certainly this country has Franklin Roosevelt's private communication was to the effect that every president since Andrew Jackson, who went out of office in 1836, every president has been owned by the cabal of ruling elite that is usually called Wall Street or the financial sector here in the U.S. Every president since 1836 of both parties has been owned by that cabal of the financial predators. Mm-hmm. And I think Roosevelt knew the truth. I think he was one of them. He was confiding that remark to the man who was the handler for Wall Street of Woodrow Wilson, E.M. House, in a private letter. And that's what we've been up against. The lies that we've been told about the Great Depression, that the federal government and FDR and so forth did absolutely everything they could to make things better and to solve, to end the poverty and get out of the Depression and so forth, is a big lie of the largest size. It was much more akin to a government that was doing much the same kind of thing that Stalin was doing in the Ukraine and in what was then the Soviet Union, but doing to the Russian people who at this date have returned to their Christianity in even larger proportions of their population than the U.S. population is Christian. Mm-hmm. And we're certainly two Christian nations so far as our people are concerned. So the kinds of things we've been told about Stalin and how evil the communism was over there. Communism was another tool of the ruling elite, the cabal that oppresses every nation, impoverishes its people, and has announced its intentions as of the beginning of the 20th century to wipe out the middle class completely. That's the same fight that we're in right now today. And for the first time in quite a long time, we have a president that is declared himself, much as Kennedy did during the middle of his administration. John F. Kennedy, I believe, the facts prove that he was elected as an establishment tool, as his father was an active member of the cabal, a close supporter and handler of Roosevelt, advisor, whatever you want to call him. Joe Kennedy and John Kennedy, quite certainly, I think the evidence indicates that he and Lyndon Johnson were elected in 1960 over another establishment tool, Nixon, by voter fraud in Texas and Illinois at least, mm-hmm. and got into office that way. But somehow something lighted in Kennedy, I believe, during his presidency. He couldn't stomach the kind of evil that he was seeing being done, and he started announcing himself against it. He was very anti-establishment in many of his public remarks, right, and in his more private actions than public. But he certainly took actions in very effective ways that were against the ruling elites' nefarious actions, and they murdered him for it. Sure, I gotcha. So where do you think we're headed here? What do you think is going to happen next? I'm looking for the declassification of the papers that we've been talking about for some time, the reports relating to the surveillance of the Trump campaign mm-hmm. illegally by the Obama administration, by the Justice Department, by the FBI, by our so-called allies, the British intelligence agencies, and also Australia was in on it. Their leadership is certainly not their people. I mean, we're talking here about the tools of the deep state. And those that are consciously doing not just criminal, but really evil things against the populations of these countries. And I believe that's why they haven't been declassified so far. Both Britain and Australia objected to the declassification on the basis that it would hurt their national security. Well, it would expose their plot to try to overthrow the elected government of the United States, to prevent an anti-establishment president from being elected, that's Donald Trump, and to then overturn his elected presidency once he was elected and then inaugurated. That has been the activity, and I believe that those so-called classified papers that really have simply been kept secret from the American people because they show the previous administration to have been so nefarious isn't a good word. I mean, this is treasonous. It's more than sedition. It's an attempt to subvert the elective process and to overthrow the elected president, elected despite their most stringent efforts to steal the election.
Yes.
It's my belief that they actually did steal 5 states that otherwise would have gone to Donald Trump in the 2016 election. But they were stopped from stealing 5 more that they needed in order to win. If those 5 states had been put back into the proper status, I think it would had a much stronger hand in terms of popular vote, but also almost certainly the races in the Senate and the House would have been more favorable to him if there hadn't been that kind of election stealing and vote fraud.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're not going to know at this point. So anyways, going ahead, you're optimistic?
I think so. The declassification, and I'm looking toward more criminal indictments, the unsealing of indictments that some people doubt are there. I'm still convinced that they are.
I wonder myself. I don't think there's 60,000 of them by any stretch. I think that's kind of nonsense. But there could be a number of high-ranking former officials facing indictment, right?
Well, I think there are high officials, both private and public officials involved in these indictments. I don't have a reason at this point to doubt the 61,000 figure because they come from the federal court system reporting sealed indictments.
Well, they aren't exactly sealed indictments. They're sealed cases. And there's a number of reasons a case can be sealed. Minors could be involved. Search warrants are being requested. Witness protection. You can have cases where you've got informers and unindicted co-conspirators that need to be kept secret until the other parties are indicted. And I actually went through the PACER system and checked it out. And for years, the number of sealed cases has been on the rise. And a lot of the cases never get unsealed. So the numbers we're getting aren't really accurate as far as how many of them deal with indictments. And when I sent off an email to the Department of Justice asking for clarification on the policy for sealed cases, their comment back to me was, "We don't comment on sealed cases." So there could be several thousands in there. I don't believe it's 60,000. The number has definitely gone up. So we could see that there are large numbers, but 60,000, very skeptical of.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll defer to those comments at this point, and we'll see how it turns out.
Hey, I hope you're right. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, I understand. Yes.
I'm only too happy that you'd be right.
So, well, there's much that's still undercover.
Yeah.
But I think it's if we can get those judges appointed,
that's
I think
important.
We're going to see movement in that regard. I don't see any reason to keep it secret from that point.
Right.
Maybe but I think this is the time for action. there was the same kind of reluctance to believe that Trump was doing anything up to the point of last December 21st, when the executive order he signed declaring a national emergency relating to human trafficking and corruption worldwide. I think that was highly significant, and it happened immediately as soon as the vote was taken the second time by the House approving the tax cut, because he couldn't do that kind of action until he had that in hand to try to get the economy back on its feet. Because certainly, at least from 2006 under Bush, I mean, the economy has been the subject of intentional infliction of bodily harm of the worst kind, bringing in that Goldman Sachs CEO to be economic czar under Bush in 2006 was, I think there could even be regarded as a crime in itself, because right at that time, Goldman Sachs was under investigation by the SEC for probably the largest financial crime in history during the tech crash.
Great point.
And after he was appointed without a word being said about it, that was quietly settled for a measly $7 million, which they probably made more than that in the first hour of what turned out to be 2.5 years of criminal activity.
Agreed. Hey, Wayne, well, we really appreciate you coming on. We kind of have to run right now.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Hey, all of you out there listening, be part of the show. Anything Wayne or myself have said here or in other places, just email us, kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. Hey, Wayne, just again, tell us what your website is.
It's classicalcapital.com. It's called also The Fruits of Graft. That's the name of my book.
I love it. That's
details
great.
The Great Depressions Then and Now was the subtitle that it was published in 2011, and I believe is the first book to give the true story of what was done to impose the Great Depression very intentionally, and was effective in starving to death millions of Americans.
Yeah.
So
we really appreciate you coming on. Hey, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again. And all of you out there, if you like the show, tell someone else about it. Share it with somebody. Share the YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're listening on that. And Wayne, we'll talk to you again real soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Gary.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.